Holy Mark Sleboda, he of the tremendous amount of knowledge and the dry humor. You've been around Russian so long, you have adopted Russian humor. At any rate, so but we got plenty to talk about. Let's talk. Hello, Garland Nixon here with Mark Sleboda. Plenty to talk about. And, we're going to talk about various things. I was talking to Mark earlier, and, everybody knows the conversation, the fear and the horror of the potential. I felt like this. Russia's been around for 1,000 years. I have a feeling it's going to be around for longer. I have a feeling, I feel that the neocons are trying to set a trap. They know they're in a world of deep and serious trouble, and they're like, "Oh my God, we gotta now." And I've also read something that said Israel wants to attack Iran, blah blah blah, and I'm like, the neocons are backed into a corner. They're horrified, and they want to turn over the table. If the table gets turned over, there's nothing we can do about it anyway. So there's no point in us ruminating out forever and stressing ourselves out. I feel like countries that have been around, here's the way I feel. Countries that have been around for a long time, 1,000 years, are wise. They can figure out what's going on. And I do feel that the Russian leadership, the Chinese leadership, the Iranian leadership, I've seen time and time again where I'm like, oh my God, Iran, this is going to happen. Oh my God, that's going to happen. And these wise leaders have made good decisions, and I feel like they will. But we shall see. You know what I mean, Mark? There's only two things in life: things you can control and things you can't control, and whichever ones you focus on will rule your life. So we're going to talk about lots of other stuff other than just that, and we shall see what happens with that. I got a positive attitude. We shall see. Okay, let's go, Mark.
Garland, thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on the show. Thanks for the intro praise, although I think I might change my subtitle from professional cynic and realist to 50-year-old curmudgeon and near Luddite. And I agree with you. Russia has been around for 1,000+ years. The question is, how much longer will you guys be around?
Yeah, how about that? Well, and that's it. As a man who studies Zen, right? Let me just say this. One of the things that you do in your study of Zen is you do this exercise, right? Where you see yourself laying down on a bed and you see yourself old and your family members and friends are around you, and then they're gone, and then your body's laying there, and then slowly it deteriorates into being a skeleton, and then slowly it turns into dust. The window is open and the wind blows and the dust blows away. And it helps you to get an understanding of the temporary nature of us being here, of your humanity. It helps you to stay in the moment and say, I'm going to enjoy this moment. Tomorrow, I could slip on a banana peel and die the second I walk out of this room. So the reality of life, I've known so many people who are like so upset, oh, that poor so-and-so, he's sick, he's this or that. And like a year later, that bastard's still running around and they're dead as a doornail. So you can't. We have to, I'm not going to ruminate over death. Death is a reality. 100 million years from now, I'll have been dead for 100 million years. And I have to ask myself the question, after I've been dead for 100 million years, did I ever really exist? So we will move forward thinking like that. And and I'll say this, let me say the other thing. Since the SMO started, I've been through this a bunch of times, where I was like, well, we're screwed now. Nuke, this weekend, we're done. And every time it seems so real, and every time we made through it, and I've come to the conclusion, I think we're going to make it through. And if we don't, what can I do about that anyway? But I feel as though we will. So at any rate, and I also feel that Mark and I are wise people. I'm not necessarily smart, but I think I'm wise because I study for wisdom, for understanding. I don't think I'm wise as Sergei Lavrov and Vladimir Putin. I'm not fooling myself. I respect those as very, very intelligent, intellectual men. And if I can figure out what the neocons are doing, I believe they can. And the term I use is race to January 20th. I think everybody realizes that the neocons are like, oh my God, we got to do crazy shit before January 20th. And I think as I've seen the Iranians, they're like, we're going to attack Israel. And then they're like, but right now that's probably not in our best move. So we'll threaten to attack Israel, and maybe we won't right now until it's our. Things are fluid with people. They're not reactionaries. They're very, very fluid and wise. So we shall see. And I have a feeling that this is episode 1, and at some point we'll be doing episode 100. That I'm getting when we do episode, and we still ain't guaranteed then. Some guy sees a radar speck, like say 1983, some lieutenant colonel in the Soviet military sees a radar speck and says, is that seagulls or is that an incoming missile? That could take us out. So that being said, Mark and I are going to enjoy the pleasure of hanging out with our friends in the chat, even the NSA and CIA trolls who populate it quite frequently. Let's start here, Mark. Let's go completely away from Russia and let's go to your thoughts. And I never really talked to you a lot about it. I've heard your comments that kind of led me to know, and I know you as a person who doesn't pretend to be a moral guy, but you are one. People who pretend to be moral never are. But people who don't pretend to be have a level of morality because they don't. And I've heard comments many times on Israel. And so I know where you stand. And I know you as a person, so I knew you'd stand there anyway. But let's go here. Your thoughts on this thing. Some people are celebrating. Some people saying, it's bullcrap. It means nothing. The ICC ruling on Netanyahu. What is your thoughts on it, Mark?
Well, I think it's far overdue, right? Now, there have been now 2 international criminal court charges pressed against world leaders, right? I mean, let's forget Yoav Gallant and some Hezbollah military commander whom we're told is probably already dead, and so forth, and a Russian human rights ombudswoman. But if we take a look at Benjamin Netanyahu and Vladimir Putin, one whom has been charged with the full support and endorsement of the West, and the other one where the West has outright condemned, and you've got U.S. senators calling for the invasion of the Netherlands, right? Again. Now, Vladimir Putin was charged by the International Criminal Court with the kidnapping of Ukrainian children. Let's parse that. With the East Ukrainians, right, former East Ukrainians, moving their own children and orphanages out of the range of the Kiev regime's, of the West-backed Kiev regime's artillery, pedal mines, and cluster munitions that had been shelling the Donbass since 2014 on a nearly daily basis up until recently. And they just managed to hit Gorlovka with cluster munitions again yesterday, dropping cluster munitions on civilian streets just because and out of spite. And Putin is blamed with helping facilitate East Ukrainians getting their children out of the range of the Kiev regime's murderous artillery, provided, of course, in no small part from the West. Meanwhile, Benjamin Netanyahu has been overseeing an occupation and ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people for decades now, and has accelerated that in the last year plus to an outright genocide, right? That the International Court of Justice, by the way, through a case launched by South Africa, is also pursuing. So there is a moral weight of the world on one side or the other of this issue. And there's not too many countries that find themselves on supporting both charges, right? You've got the part of the world that supports I'm sorry, complete bull feces charges against Putin, right? And you've got the part of the world that doesn't support the charges against Benjamin Netanyahu. Now, Israel is not a party to the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. So supposedly it has no jurisdiction. That's certainly the argument being made. Neither is the United States. But then again, neither is Russia and neither is Ukraine a party to the International Criminal Court. But somehow it holds against Putin that, right? But not Netanyahu. Now, of course, Netanyahu will never see the inside of a cell. I mean, unless at some point some unconceivable future Israeli government sends him there themselves. But what the Western press has been crowing about for, since the charges, through this largely U.S. captured institution have pressed against Putin, they claim that it has helped isolate Putin. I really think that the only countries that Putin has really been largely isolated from is the West, and it tends to look more and more like the West is isolating themselves from the rest of the world, the global majority. But to be fair, Putin was not able to attend international multilateral forums in South Africa and the G20 recently held in Brazil, because those two countries are a party to the Rome Statute. And although both promised that, that they wouldn't pursue Putin, the Russian government didn't want to risk the judicial political destabilization of these countries stirred up by the United States. All right. So Lavrov, went in both situations. Now Netanyahu is going to face the same thing. And you've actually had several European countries come out and say, well, whatever we may think, that's a charge for the International Criminal Court, and we'll have to follow it. Which, for the few that admitted that accepted that, well, hands off on that. At least even if the hill you're standing on is a pile of bull feces, at least you're attempting to stand on that hill. I'll say that. But it will infuriate Netanyahu, right? I mean, he demands the West is supposed to accept and support him, and the rest of the world too is supposed to get in line, of course. But to have defectees from the West seeking to judge him, that is unacceptable. And unfortunately, the most likely outcome of that is, one, I already think the International Criminal Court is completely discredited as an institution after the charges against Putin. Now it will further be eroded, not because the charges against Netanyahu are a similar pile of bull feces, but simply because the U.S. will do everything it can now to bring down that institution. So it's facing a credibility gap on one hand, and the opprobrium. And for some of the prosecutors and judges of the International Criminal Court that find themselves stuck between these two polar opposite ends here, you can almost have some sympathy for them there. But I'm afraid that Netanyahu will do something, lash out of some type of fury and outrage and anger even more. Seymour Hersh reported this week, and it has been echoed by at least one Israeli official I saw, that they are at least considering it, that the Netanyahu intends to annex the West Bank completely in the near future. And I don't know if that's true. I'm certain. I mean, I don't think there's a day that has gone by in Netanyahu's adult life where he hasn't thought about that. But I mean, this is what we've been facing since October 7th of last year, is the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people from their own country occupied by Israel. And it has progressed with Gaza, but I mean, the logical conclusion of that is to take advantage of all of this, to take advantage of a lame duck Biden leading into a pro-Israel, a pro-Zionist Trump administration, to just go all the way, to accelerate that slow motion ethnic cleansing by house and by settlement, to just take the whole kit and caboodle and ironically turn the Palestinian people into the type of homeless diaspora that the Jewish people once were.
One of the things that's going on here, I'd like to jump forward from this, because one of the things that you and I are talking about, not talking about, but we're really talking about this, is the U.S. empire is making it real clear to the world. The rest of the world is looking and they're like, we knew you were a bunch of bastards, but geez, did you really have to, you know what I mean? We knew you people were really bad news, but did you really have to make it this pronounced, right? The Biden administration is, I can just say this. When I was in law enforcement, I worked for an agency that had some real jerks running it, some real clowns when I first started. And these guys became the superintendent, deputy superintendent, and they were effectively Biden. They were fascist type people, and they blew it all up, and then it started all over again, right? And it was far better. And when I say blew it all up, they couldn't control themselves, and they screwed things up so bad that they discredited themselves, got them fired, everybody fired, and it was able to start the agency over, right? I feel like the Biden administration, let's do this. Well, after all of the crap that has happened, let's go forward here 6-8 months. Let's say there's something happens in Ukraine and this thing is able to get closed down one way or the other, right? Okay, there's a deal, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, exactly, But I feel like one of these days we'll be saying, Mark, we thought this couldn't happen, but it's going to happen, but it happened. I really believe that. Okay. And Russia's moving forward now. To me, Russia and China, man, I'm not going to say the kings of the hill. In a way, the kings of the hill, right? But not in a U.S. empire dominant way. There's two ways to be in charge. One is to be dominant over people. The other is everybody says, man, we really like you and we like your style. We want you to be the boss or be in charge or be a power player. How do you see Russia's relationships with the various entities around the world? If this thing could get, I'm not going to say wrapped up, I'm going to say stabilized, so Russia can go on with its life, as we say, some level of stability, something. Where do you see the future for Russia and its allies?
Yeah. Okay. So first of all, I actually don't think that's going to happen. I don't think it's going to be wrapped up anytime in the near future. I think we'll be talking about this next year at this time. And
do you think the word stabilized is rather than wrapped up, more stabilized to some level? So I think, go ahead.
I don't think there's any stabilization until the regime in Kiev is removed.
Yeah. Well, then I'm saying that. That's why I'm going there. One of the things, because stabilize for whom? Here, what I think is, I do believe at some point that the Trump administration, I think they're going to yank the economic, if you're here, the drive from the people is getting so powerful to say, man, we don't like this. This is whoa. Even now, the intellectuals, so many people are like, whoa. We get to January 20th. The drive is powerful. People are scared, shitless, upset, angry, you name it. So they want some level of stability. I believe the real issues are going to happen. That Europe is going to come unglued. I think Europe is set to. Russia is economically and culturally and militarily and politically stable. I think Europe is on the edge of real serious instability, which will be part of that. But at any rate, the future, let's talk about the future for Russia. What kind of a future Russia sees would like, if it's a year out, if it's 5 years out, what Russia sees and what you see as a future for Russia, when and if we can get some level of stability with the Ukraine neocon project.
Okay, so I think that Russia is going to be permanently decoupled from the West, right? From the US and the EU both.
Does that mean stop? Does that mean stop selling stuff? How much does that mean economically?
Well, I mean, they largely already have. I mean, what little that they still do is being wound down now, right? The gas supplies to the last of the countries that were getting pipeline gas, Hungary, Slovakia, Serbia, they're doing everything they can to shut that down now as well. And, they're still buying Russian oil, for instance. It's just all through an Indian middleman. The EU countries have all become major purchasers of Indian oil, quote unquote, right? That India didn't sell oil. It's an oil importer, but that is it's already the costs even added, and the cost of even buying Russian, and US LNG instead of pipeline gas is just reduced European economic competitiveness and the ability to sustain their own overstretched budgets, deeply in debt. You're looking at, and I don't think we're far from saying that Europe is facing an economic and social collapse, right? They're going to suddenly have to start living within their means. They can't print their way out of this crisis like the United States can, right? But there still isn't the political settlement that I can see anywhere in Europe, right? I mean, bar a few outsiders like Hungary and Slovakia, possibly Austria in the future. But, France, Germany, the United Kingdom, not part of the EU now, but, and so forth. The Scandinavian countries, the Western Europe of the Netherlands and Belgium and so forth. There just doesn't exist a political alternative that could have a modern day Ostpolitik. It doesn't. We're going to have to see a generation or two pass before there is any hope of healing the wounds in a Russian-European relationship. So that's going to leave Russia looking more to the east, right, to Eurasia and to the rest of the world. And I mean, to be fair, in the last 3 years, its gaze has been firmly in that direction. I'm so happy to see that. It's time. Putin has said, first of all, the Russian elite, what is thought of as the Russian elite, is changing as a result of this. Putin has been quite clear and said the new Russian elite needs to be largely veterans of the SMO, right? That's the people that need to be at the top, making the decisions, having the influence on Russian society. And of course, it's a process, but I think the process is genuinely beginning. I think that is actually happening to a degree, at least. And this game of since the 90s of the Russian elite sending their children off to Western universities and colleges and having second homes and in Tuscany and what that needs to end. And I think it is ending.
Yeah.
But Putin's children and grandchildren, right? They speak Chinese. They're being taught Chinese. And that is, that there is not a clearer sign to me, right? Putin, his own family, Putin doesn't do family in a public way,
right?
But we heard that in the last year that Putin's grandchildren are learning to speak fluent Chinese. That is where Russia is looking. Not only China, of course, right? Russia has always been trying to balance that by maintaining or trying to rejuvenate a somewhat stalled relationship with India. But also, Russia is on a full court press with Africa. I mean, Africa is all the buzz in Russia now, right? You can see Africans now all over Moscow in numbers that really haven't been seen since the Soviet Union, and not just students, but business people and Africans who are coming here increasing numbers just to work and to live. And
Russia needs, let me ask you this about that real quick. One of the things I'm seeing, which is a sign of a really strong economy, is Russia seems to be reaching out to other countries saying, we don't have enough people to work the jobs we have. And there's that they're talking about North Korea's on the battlefield, that more North Koreans are coming to the east, that they've got work, plenty of it, and not enough people to do the work, which, boy, wouldn't you love to have an economy like that anywhere in the West?
Yeah, there's a lot more likelihood of North Koreans in large numbers working at Russian factories and farms and the sort at this point. Russia is facing a manpower shortage, right? In no small, first of all, because the Russian economy is just growing so fast. As a result, it's even overheating a bit. Inflation is kicking up, and the central bank is working to bring that under rein. But with a number of young and middle-aged men who have joined the Russian military as contract soldiers for the SMO with really, really good pay and benefits, it must be said, that has left a second, hole for the workforce. And and at the same time, I think because things have been complicated with banking and everything, because of the sanctions having some effect, particularly on Central Asian countries, that you're seeing also somewhat less immigrant labor from Central Asia, which is where always Russia has drawn the greater share of its immigrant labor, such as before. I've heard that you see them, they're in Moscow, they're in Russia, they're called dvorniki, right? They're quite often Central Asians who take menial jobs, cleaning up, buildings and so forth. They're now making pay and benefits, they're in smaller numbers, but now they're now making pay and benefits that they simply didn't before, because they're in high demand now. But
and when you say Central Asia, do you mean like the stands or?
Central, particularly Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, to a lesser extent, Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan are pretty, that happens to a lesser degree because they're more economically self-sufficient and contained. But particularly Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan are two of the biggest draws there. Also from the Caucasus, but particularly from Central Asia. But Russia is also reaching out economic relations to Southeast Asia as well. Just major meetings and military exercises with Malaysia and Indonesia, right? And this is a really interesting dynamic, because a lot of countries that are still somewhat wary of China, right? Because it's the big elephant in their own room, right? And seeking to balance those relations and seek some type of third-party guarantee. They've got the option, of course, of aligning themselves with the United States, which just makes them into proxies against China. And they know that, right? They can see that happening in real time with the Kurds and in Syria and the Ukrainians. And, they can all see what's going to happen to the Taiwanese and the Philippines if they stay that course. But they now have kind of a third option, and that's to improve relations with Russia. and that serves as a kind of guarantor of relations with China, because of course China is not going to push those countries too hard if they're already aligning largely geopolitically with China's if you want to say partner in crime, Russia, because the two are practically joined at the hip now. They have really started to complement each other very well, right? Not just economically, but geopolitically as well. And when you see Vietnam and Malaysia and Indonesia in establishing these firm relations with Russia, in a way, that's helping a kind of political and security guarantor against China as well. And it's not so much against as being brought into a multilateral system where they feel safer because Russia is guaranteeing them as much as the behemoth in their own room is.
Yeah,
it's a kind of balance.
Yeah, well, and I think they probably, and my immediate thought, if I'm one of those countries, is, look, I'm friends with Russia. China and Russia are really, tied. They need each other. They're huddling together to, for survival and to strengthen themselves. And China doesn't want to offend Russia by screwing with a country that it would be kind of like offending them if Russia has good relations with a country and China comes in and slaps the dickens out of them. They ain't going to do that. Neither one of them are going. They have a great relationship and they need it. Let me ask you this, something I'm curious about. The Muslim world. Russia has it's something that's really beneficial to Russia, actually, in the Muslim world, is they've got a lot of Muslim people, there, and they've got regions that are allowed to thrive as a Muslim region, not independently, but semi-autonomously.
We're talking Chechnya, fairly autonomous.
Yeah, in some ways, that most countries wouldn't allow, and they respect them. Your thoughts on Russia's future with the Muslim world, in that I believe the U.S., you talk about screwing themselves up in the Muslim world, despised the future of the Muslim world with Russia, and the fact that having a good relationship with the Muslim world also gives you a relationship with a lot of very powerful, very rich, very oil-rich countries, gas-rich countries, resource-rich countries. The strength of Russia's relationship with, and the future of Russia's relationship with the Muslim world, the Middle Eastern countries, but include the Muslim world, such as the Indonesians and stuff. I think was it Indonesia or Malaysia, the one that has so many, whichever. You get the point, Mark.
Yeah. So, I mean, first, let's address that issue of Russia's own internal Muslim world, right? Islam has been part of Russia since, really since the days of the Mongolian horde, right? I mean, if you want to go back that far. And then when it started going the other way, and even Ivan Grozny started conquering Tartarstan, and that, then already as soon as Russia started expanding outside of Muscovy, right? It had Muslim lands within, and they have, Russia hasn't always been at peace with the Muslim world, right? A long series of wars with the Ottoman Empire and the like, and not historically always great relations with Iran, with Persia, right? There was a bit there. But certainly in the last decades, it has, right, had a much better relationship. And that relationship has only improved since Russia's intervention to save the Syrian government. Despite the number of Arab countries that aligned with the United States to overthrow the Syrian government by jihadi proxy, once Russia stepped in, I think they developed a real respect for Russia's strength and the way Russia stood by an ally, right?
Mm-hmm.
Stood by the Syrian government, and against the United States, against the entirety of the West again. And you've seen Russian relations with Saudi Arabia and the UAE and many other of these Gulf countries dramatically improve. And Saudi Arabia, in particular, for managing oil prices, has discovered that OPEC plus, which is, let's be fair, Russia and Saudi Arabia, it's a
Yeah.
lot easier for Saudi Arabia to deal bilaterally with Russia than it is for them to try to, herd the gaggle of geese that is the rest of OPEC. And with Russia and Saudi Arabia on board together, and they can then just go to the rest of OPEC and say, this is what we're doing. We're the two big boys on the block. If you don't want to play, we don't care. So I think Mohammed bin Salman has done a lot of maturing.
Really, I agree.
Yeah, over recent years in foreign policy, from the crazy years when he started out.
Yeah. Kidnapping people and putting them in a Ritz-Carlton and stuff.
Yeah. But that said, I think we're going to see Saudi Arabia probably tilt a little bit. They're not going to go back 100%, right? But they're probably going to tilt back a little bit more in the U.S. direction in the next couple of years, because Trump and got along well with the Saudi government, whereas Biden didn't. Now, I think Saudi Arabia is going to see the advantages of working with Russia, particularly on oil prices, but not only. And, just as a multi-vector foreign policy, they're not going to go back to the U.S. privileged vassal state. But they're playing a smart, self-interested foreign policy, and I have more respect for Saudi foreign policy in the last few years than I ever have before. So hats off there. But Russia is going to be an increasing member of the Muslim world, because Russia's Muslim population, which is now maybe 15% of the Russian population, maybe a little bit more, but it's growing in terms of share, because the parts of the Russian Federation that are Muslim, right, mostly in the south, right, we're talking the Caucasus, or most of the Caucasus anyway, Dagestan, Ingushetia, but also Tartarstan, Bashkortostan, Cherkessia, so forth. These, they have a higher birth rate than much of the rest of the Russian population. So, Russia's building more mosques. And there was just this big BRICS, BRICS meeting in Kazan. And Kazan is often called the third capital of Russia, or the Eurasian capital of Russia. And it's actually, as a good Eurasianist, I love Kazan. Kazan is a wonderful city. And inside Kremlin, by the way, Kreml is just the Russian word for fortress. Okay. And inside the Kreml in Kazan, most Russian cities have a Kreml, right? A fortress at their center, going back historically. But inside the Kreml of Kazan, there is an Orthodox church and a Sufi mosque facing each other, right in the center of the mosque. And Kazan is also known as the big interfaith capital of Russia, right? Where there are, of course, also Jewish temples, and there's not a whole lot of Buddhists in Kazan, but of course, simply because of the strong focus on the multi religious aspect of Kazan, that is there as well. In fact, in what seems almost like another life or an alternate history, there was a time where Hillary Clinton right, actually came out and said that Kazan is an example of how the Christian world and the Islamic world can live in peace together.
Hillary Clinton talking about people living in peace.
Peace, yeah, I
That
know.
gives
That's
me the
why I said
chills.
it almost seems like a different world, a different time. But that you're right. That helps Russia relate to the rest of the Islamic world. When Ramzan Kadyrov practically runs his own foreign policy as the leader of Chechnya, but he's one of the big things he's doing is resettling refugees and orphans from Palestine, right? Previously from Syria. He's building housing complexes, and so forth. I mean, not on a tremendous scale,
Right.
but he's doing it as the leader of Chechnya on a scale that works, for him. And he's eccentric, right? There's no case about that, and Putin largely lets him do what he wants to do as long as he keeps Chechnya nice and peaceful. And Grozny is an incredibly beautiful, rebuilt city. I mean, just it's beautiful and it's wealthy and so forth. But Russia's Muslim population really helps them with the outreach to the Muslim world in a way that the U.S. can't, because Russia is usually conceived of as a Russian or as an Orthodox Christian country, and it is, but it also has 5 major state-sanctioned religions. It is a multi-ethnic, multi-confessional country, and every year, Putin meets with the patriarch, but when he does so, he also meets with the leader of Sufi Islam in Russia and the Eurasian Judaism and the Kalmyk Buddhists and the 5th state-sanctioned religion is the Tengri shamanists, the pagan faith of Siberia. And so these tradition religions, they all have a say, and Putin meets with them all, and they meet together. And it's not all kumbaya, let's be honest, right? But it continually makes progress, and there is just a different attitude towards religion in Russia than there is in the United States. I'm not personally religious in that sense, but I think in a very Russian way, I'm very respectful of traditional religions and the role they play as the moral guidelines and the social guidelines for cohesion of society, and for having a wisdom, whether you believe their particular divine beliefs or not, but still having a moral and social wisdom that it is Russia respects, I think, in a way that Russia has a very high, comparatively, of course, to atheist population, but it is not a kind of spiteful relationship as you often find in the West between the religious and the non-religious.
Yeah, let me, another thing that's interesting, and that is one thing about Russia's and China's relationship, right? It is what Europe could have had. And here's what I mean. You've got Europe with lots of people to work, and they had lots of engineers and people like that and factories, and there's somebody right next door to them with all of these natural resources. You talk about a match made in economic heaven, right? Of course, the US is like, nah, we don't want that to happen, because then, in fact, that is a match made in economic heaven, and you guys will. But that is what's interesting is the US, from a geopolitical perspective, the neocons and their historical ancestors, political ancestors, from a geopolitical perspective, wanted to keep Russia and China apart for geopolitical advantage. But they didn't really seem to talk about economics as much. It was geopolitical. We don't want them to become friends because there's too many. And then there's Eurasia and blah, blah, and the landmass. He who controls that controls the world. All that historical crap, right? I don't have to get into that. But my point being this. But you got that exactly now. You got China with this monstrous, I mean, monstrous industrial capacity. And you got Russia with this monstrous natural resources capacity. And so, as powerful as China is, and as powerful as Russia is, you combine that together in a way, forget the West. The West is deteriorating, screw them. They're deteriorating by their own hand, whatever. If they wake up, fine. If they don't, fine. The potential, economic, industrial, everything potential there as they build, I think, as they continue to build markets in Africa, to build their own markets in South America and around Asia, et cetera, to build their markets in the world. What's that word? Majority.
And not just to build markets, but to build the infrastructure so that they can have the markets in those places. That is what they do that the West has never done.
In fact, I believe Vance, not that they'd be able to do that here, said, you know, China goes in and they build roads and stuff, and we go in and bombs. I mean, there is some level of realism in the way he views things. There's certainly lots of issues there, but I'm just saying there are people that see that. Your thoughts on the potential for what the hell this thing could be in 10, 20 years as they combine. And I think the world is looking for stability. I think they understand that right now that ain't in the cards. But in the event that there's some level of stability achieved, some level of stability, what level that will be, the potential for Russia and China is, I don't know. Anyway, your thoughts.
Yeah. So if the,
and where, one other thing, and where India falls in with that thing. Go ahead.
Yeah. Where if the institutional potential for a multipolar world is BRICS, then the core of BRICS is the bilateral relationship between Russia and China, right? That is the foundation of it. And then if you expand that out further, it is the political triangle between Russia and China and India. And Russia actually, I think both sides, both China and India, which obviously have geopolitical differences over a uninhabited plateau so high in the Himalayas that guns don't work, and when they fight, they have to resort to fisticuffs and beating each other with sticks. Literally, the guns don't work at that altitude, right? Nothing lives up there. But you know, Russia helps keep the peace between China and India. And I don't know if there would be that peace without Russia,
right?
Because both want good relations with Russia, and Russia wants them to have good relations so that they can form a you know, the three pillars of Eurasia, of a non Western dominated Eurasia, and I think China and India both understand that and appreciate how Russia, in a way, keeps them from each other's throats, right? Keeps them peaceable and the like. So now there's no question that today, in the current day, the priority for Russia is the relationship with China, right? Both economically and more, you know, even more importantly, strategically and geopolitically. Because India has been trying to play both sides of the fence and have good relations with the United States, which I regard as you know, I whenever I talk to Indians, I always say, so who is it that sanctions you when you want to have relations with us? Is it China? Do we sanction you for relations with the US? So what kind of partner is the United States, right? You know, but it is important for keeping India out of US hands, out of US and British influence. Russia is the primary thing that keeps India from being completely, you know, drawn into that Western world. So while the relationship between Russia and China is more important now for Russia and for China both, of course, there won't be a united multipolar world and Eurasia beyond that bilateral relationship, until it becomes a proper menage a trois with India as well.
I think I certainly agree, and I've for the last couple years, I've felt like Russia slowly, and I think they understand that it's going to take time. Slowly, Russia's trying to bury the hatchet and bridge the gap between India, India, and they're as I say, they're very wise. They understand this doesn't happen overnight, and I think they have a long-term plan for it. To be quite frank,
yes. Agree.
Let me ask you something. Good old Germany. It's an interesting country. I want to get your thoughts on that. They got it's a very unstable country. They got a bomb with a long fuse, and that is Nord Stream. They don't know what the hell to do with that because the people there know what happened, and they don't know what the hell that they're going to do with that. They got an election coming up in February. It's politically completely, to me, Germany's politically has been destabilized, economically destabilized. I don't know where their future holds. What are your thoughts on the upcoming election in Germany? What are your thoughts on the next couple years in Germany as if people keep losing their jobs and all, man, that place is going to go to hell. It's going to
Germany's only going to get worse. It's only going to get worse because of their political system, because of the nature of their political parties. So right now you have this, what has been for several years, this fragile traffic light coalition of Olaf Scholz's SPD, the quote Greens, which really are just German neocons.
They're the Democrats. They're the Democrats.
And the Free Democrats, which are like the pro-business neoliberals, the smallest partner of that coalition. That coalition has collapsed, ostensibly, actually, over the issue of aid for Ukraine.
Yep.
And although there's probably more domestic alternatives, I think the Free Democrats wanted to disassociate themselves, and they decided to use that to do it because they have an eye on an election. That they think they would be better off with a healthy degree of remove between them and their two partners if they want to crack that 5% threshold and keep in the Bundestag, keep in the German government. But here's the problem. So the trajectory of German political settlement right now is clear. There is increasing economic anxiety, right? Germany has deindustrializing as a result of its own suicidal sanctions policies. Germans are starting to be more and more concerned with the cost to them of continuing to support this regime in Kiev. And there's also growing concern in German society about the practically unrestrained immigration that they've had over recent years. And this is no longer just a right-wing issue. It's a left issue as well, because it's taking jobs, right, away from working class people and the like. And quite often Germany's benefit system for these refugees is outrageous. It's really quite ridiculous. Even there's a lot of resentment going from working Germans towards it. So, but despite this, right, this growing trend, and we saw this in local elections in East Germany, where there was a big rise of the quote unquote far right AfD, the Alternative for Germany, Alternative for Deutschland, and Sarah Wagenknecht's new, it's essentially a reformed communist party, a far left party. And
is it like Fico kind of?
Yeah. It's old school. It's old school left, right? Not progressive left, old school left, right? And they have in common, right, if you want to call it Kiev regime skepticism, right? Opposition. And they also have skepticism, although coming from different motivations on the issue of migrants, immigration. So, but first of all, those two parties will never cooperate with each other, at least not in the modern day. And while the AFD is now polling as the second most popular party in the country, the establishment parties are considering banning the AFD, right? Just because they're terrified now at the rise of it. I don't think they have to do that, right? Because the system manages. Because the AFD will probably come in second, but it won't be able to form a government. And the rest of the parties will cooperate together, just like they did in France to keep out the National Front, right? You have the same type of blocking mechanism that will protect the establishment against any type of severe change, particularly foreign policy change, which is always a heresy. So it's going to leave the biggest party to be the Christian Democratic Union, right? The party of that was the party of Angela Merkel. They'll come in with 30-some% of the vote. They'll be the highest. The AFD will come in second. And the end result is that the Christian Democratic Union, in order to form a government, will almost certainly have to cooperate with Olaf Scholz's SPD, which will come in third or fourth in the elections. And the irony of that is, though, increasing German settlement against supporting the Kiev regime in Ukraine, with a CDU-led government, they'll actually get a far more rabidly pro-Kiev regime government, because Merzer, the leader of the Christian Democratic Union, that's one of his campaign issues, right? Increased support for Ukraine, sending Zelensky Taurus cruise missiles that Olaf Scholz has already denied it. So Germany is going to double down on their own economic and geopolitical suicide, even as the public is actually expressing interests of trying to go in the other direction. They just don't have a critical mass, and Germany's party structure doesn't facilitate that type of radical change that occurred in Slovakia. It's just unfortunately not going to happen. And so we're actually going to see increasing, you're going to see the same level of increasing tension, an escalation between Russia and Germany in just a couple months that you're seeing between Russia and the US and the UK now.
Let me ask you this, but we're getting towards the end. Something I've been wondering about in Russia, and I'm sure being a man in Moscow, you know about this dynamic. In Moscow, there was, I don't know which column you called, fourth, fifth, sixth. I don't know what number column they were, but they were a numbered column. We got to give them that. Yeah. And they were yes, things would be far better if we were just like the West. Oh boy, Hollywood's wonderful. The West is lovely and we love the West.
If only Russia, the largest country in the world, was a normal country. Yeah. What do you mean by a normal country? Should we act just like the US and become the most aggressive and corrupt country in the world? No, like the Netherlands, right?
No.
Like you want the largest country in the world to be just like one of the smallest countries in the world. Okay, Russian liberals, go to the Netherlands. Go to Israel.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this. I have heard it said and discussed that, let's just say, they ain't what they used to be before the percentages have dropped off, that the zeal for Western stuff and multiple genders and all those kinds of wonderful things that we have in the West ain't what it used to be. Your thoughts? Is there what column are they anyway? Are they the fifth column? Is that
you could call them the fifth column, the sixth column, right? Whatever. They don't exist anymore. For all
okay, yeah, talk about that. What happened with the special military operation and the liberals, or whatever the hell you'd call them?
Yeah. So the Russian has perennially had about somewhere between 3 and 5% of the population that was liberal pro-Western, right? Which is an extreme minority, but they were a very vocal minority amplified by money and the fact that whenever any Western media or news show or everything, they only talk to those Russians, the extreme minority that talked and sounded like and them, right? That was but so they would have these protests that were absolutely minuscule, but always headlined Western papers and the like, and they were allowed to protest as long as they followed the rules and didn't try to overthrow the government. They never had the numbers to repeat what happened in Ukraine and the like. But since 2022, it has been blessed silence. They are gone. And a big part of it is large number of them are the people that left the country. They literally left the country. There was all this kind of fear, we don't want to be mobilized in Putin's war. That was always nonsense, right? These people aren't people who served in the military, right? And the only people who were mobilized, that 300,000, right, in 2022, there's never been another round of mobilization. The only ones who were mobilized were reservists, right? There was never a chance that Joe Liberal IT worker was ever going to be mobilized, right? But it was also just more or less a rejection, right? We want to get to the West that we love because we know that the entire relationship is falling apart. So they weren't all able to go to the West. Those that could did, but a lot of them then went to Georgia and Armenia and these other countries that had a freer visa relationship. But although recently in Georgia, those pro Western Russian liberal immigrants or migrants there, I guess, actually have been really kind of on the bad side of the majority of Georgian society and the Georgian Dream Party, as the West was trying desperately to push Georgia into opening a suicidal second front against Russia, and the Georgian Dream Party wasn't having any of that and has ended up moving further away from the US and the EU than they ever wanted. But the US and the EU basically gave them an ultimatum: you're either with us or against us. And we're like, well, we're not with you on this, but we don't want to. I guess we are against you. Okay. It wasn't really given a choice. But wherever they've scattered, they've gone to the winds. They're no longer a political force in Russia. They're no longer an even vocal force. There are still dissident voices in Russia, but such that really aren't of the pro-Western liberal nature anymore, right? They're gone. And it has been blessed silence, and you don't have to deal with, responding to these ridiculous Western media stories where they try to overinflate and exaggerate a protest of a couple thousand in a country that is 148 million strong. It has actually been so nice that I don't have to deal with that nonsense anymore. And don't have to even, the stomach clench that watch it, knowing that it's happening somewhere, on the streets of my city. It just doesn't happen anymore. They left. I hope they're happy. I know I'm happier that they left. I genuinely hope they're happier that they left too. Let's keep it that way.
Right?
I immigrated to Russia because I was a dissident in my own country, and I was happier with the politics and the society here. I fully support that the extreme minority of Russians, if you really want the West, well, go live in the West. More power to you, right? Let's have that. And Russia has been doing that now. They've actually, for the first time, been encouraging, ideological immigrants again. Right. Now it's not leftist, it's traditional values or, anti-hegemonists and everything. but they're actually making the immigration process much, much easier than it was for me.
Let me ask you this. I had understood it that at one time, a bunch of them that had went to several countries were trying to come back.
Yeah. Yeah. They're previously the Russian government, there wasn't the geopolitical focus on Western immigrants to Russia who were seeing something that they wanted to be a part of, but there wasn't a government level support for it. And the Russian bureaucracy, well, I mean, it can be just as difficult as, say, getting a green card in the United States, right? It's a difficult thing. It's not an easy process. But now there are now people who attempted to immigrate to Russia before and just found, particularly if they didn't speak Russian and didn't have someone who did, they found it an impossible process. Now there is a government focus on it, right, to make the process easier for ideological immigrants who don't speak Russian.
All right.
Which isn't to say that you're going to be handed a job and a condo and everything if you come here, but they're going to make it easier, right?
Well, I'll put it like this. From what I've understood of everybody that's gone there, the Russians have the most beautiful women on earth. Will they at least issue you a beautiful Russian wife? Is that a possibility?
I don't think they'll issue a beautiful Russian wife, but there are a lot of beautiful Russian women. Crimean wife,
there you go.
Right now, certainly one there. Not only beautiful, it must be said, but smart as all F too. So
yeah. Well, and
which is just as more important, actually.
Yes. Well, thanks a lot, Mark. Certainly appreciate it. And where can everybody find you online?
I just, before we close out, I want to ask you: did you see the video? We've almost avoided talking about it.
Yeah.
But did you see the video of the Oreshnik?
Man, that thing was unbelievable. That was unbelievable.
I mean, there was that one. There was 3 different camera perspectives that I saw filmed by 3 different people, and one of them, the cloud layer was positioned just so that when these 6 MIRV hypersonic warheads descended through the clouds, it looked like the hand of God touching down, or aliens, right? I mean, it looked positively science fiction or an actual wonder weapon. I mean, that's and horrible. It must be said. I mean, it must be absolutely terrifying, of course, to be on the other side of this. And my only concern, though, is that the West will not take the lesson from that they should have, right?
No.
They will instead say, Putin was too weak and afraid to hit us, so we hit him and he just hit the Kiev regime. He just hit the Ukrainians. I'm afraid that they will take exactly that lesson, that they will read that as more weakness, and that will do more than anything to put us on that dangerous path to a world war we don't want. Yeah.
Well, and I'd say this, we talked earlier, because way back when something was going on in Iran, and another one of these times when people thought, oh my God, everything's going to go to hell. This was some years back, and I remember somebody saying to me, "Look at the guys that run Iran. They're old." Yeah. You don't get old being stupid. You don't get old being reckless. You get old because you're wise and you know how to get old, right? And I just look at the things that have been happening over the last several years, the provocations against China, the provocations against Iran, when Iran had every right to strike back with all the might that they had, and everybody thought, oh my God, now we're done for, right? And I just think, man, these we're talking civilizations that have been around for 1,000 years, thousands of years, right? I just think to myself, you don't stick around 1,000 years being stupid, being angry, operating off of emotion. We got to punch back. They're thinking this thing out, and they have a far longer view of history and what happens and what has to be done than January 20th. We got to punch it back. Oh, January 20th is a billionth of a second in the history of Russia. So they don't have to say, well, this could kill everybody, but we got to do it now. I don't think the Russians and the Chinese and the Iranians think like that. I think they realize there's a trap right now, that we're not trapped. The neocons are trapped. They're trapped. And they're trying to set some kind of trap for you to do something stupid to, quote, get them out of the trap, even if it's, off this mortal plane. I don't think the Russians, the Chinese, or the Iranians are stupid enough to do anything that's going to not benefit them. I think they're wise. And I also think that the provocations against Russia, if they don't work, to some extent, Russia will do something, but it'll be something that benefits them. I believe there'll be massive provocations against China coming up, probably in the South China Sea, the Taiwan Straits. I think that's coming. I think they're going to be reaching and punching and all. Now I'm reading, yes, the Israelis are saying they may have to strike the Iranian nuclear stuff. I think that's all part of this. It's like, oh my God, well, maybe we can do this and raise hell. Oh my God, well, how about over here? That the Chinese, and I believe that the powerful people who make the decisions in these various entities know right now they got to race to January 20th if they make that they can make and at least have some breathing room to start negotiating or doing something, and get Biden, so-called Biden, the Blinken-Sullivan administration out of the White House. And I do think, I just keep saying, if I'm smart enough to figure that out, you ain't going to tell me that Lavrov and Wang Yi and the guys in Iran are not smart enough to figure that out. So I got more confident than most. Go ahead.
I absolutely agree with you. I have no fear of Russian or Iranian or Chinese stupidity. But much like when you're driving on the road, you can have complete faith in your own caution. I worry about U.S. and Western stupidity.
Yep.
I worry about the people that are driven by this supremacist messianic ideology of U.S. Western exceptionalism and what they will do to everyone else on the road because they're on the same road as the rest of us.
Yeah. If you won't fire at me, maybe I'll have to fire at you, kind of stuff, and they know, I'm not saying anything good, bad, or indifferent about Trump, but they know that the American people have raised the question. You know what I mean? In the blowout of Trump, the American people, I think part of that was, man, we're sick and tired of you bastards. And it's not that Trump is great. This isn't a comment on Trump. It's a comment on the American people have said, these neocons, man, for a number of reasons, not the least of which being the neocons have this crazy, this not fascist. Let's call them what they are, the fascists. And the fascists are always worried about military and expansion around the world, but they don't give a damn about the people at home. They don't give a crap anymore about the American people than they do about the Ukrainian people or any of the rest of them. And I think that's why they have some concern that I think their fear, and this is the danger, and they're right, that the whole neocon project is in danger because the people of America, and it's going to happen in Europe, are going to look at this, are starting to look at this neocon project saying, man, this doesn't work for us. We don't like it. And it's a dangerous situation, but I think they know their danger is really internally. You know what I mean? You know what I'm getting at?
I think we disagree on what we think the importance of foreign policy to the average Trump voter is. I'm sure that I know there are Trump voters out there listening to this show. And I'm not talking about you, quite obviously. You're here listening to this show.
And I wasn't a Trump voter. I'm a third party guy anyway.
Yeah. Okay. But you know that there are Trump supporters out, right? Yeah. Who are concerned with foreign policy. But I think the polling evidence shows that they are an extreme minority. And if Trump woke up on January 30th and said, we've always been at war with Eurasia, it's a huge problem, that the majority of Trump supporters would just get in line and have always been at war with Eurasia. I think that's the fatality of American polarized Pepsi Coke politics.
I'll add this though, you got to define foreign policy. Here's what I mean. I don't think that Trump voters are like, okay, we want to define, foreign policy. What's going on in the Nagorno-Karabakh? How about the Caucasus? What about in the, on the Guyana-Venezuela border? Not like that. But here's what I mean. I've often felt like this. When you talk about foreign policy, right? Okay, they don't fix my roads. Everything's going to hell here. The ports are falling apart. Our infrastructure is falling apart. Why? Because they spend all of our money on 900 bases and having CIU, right? So while technically to them, specifically, it's not foreign policy, but in an empire, in a way, it's always foreign policy because it's about a decision about where the money goes. And we know right now the money goes to build a B-2 Raider bomber that costs $500 million each. Means that those are schools and that those are things that aren't going to be built here. And I don't know that they make the connection, but I do think that because when you interpret foreign policy in an empire as everything suffers at home because of empire policy, it is that, but they don't see it, but they feel it. You know what I mean? They feel the pain.
The metropole of empire is broken.
Yeah, that's why I got to have you on here, Mark, because you're a smart guy and you'll come up with words that I would have never thought of. Metropole. What? Because I'm not smart. I'm Mark Sleboda. That's why. All right, Mark. Well, again, where can people find you?
I consider myself in a peer category on your show myself. But anyway, you can follow me on Twitter X at Mark Sleboda 1, or you can follow me on my Substack, always free, or Telegram at The Real Politic with Mark Sleboda.
All right. Thanks a lot, Mark Sleboda. Always a glad. Mark's a great friend of mine, and I really enjoy talking to him. We've become good friends over the years just from chatting and talking and hanging out every day on the critical hour. That was pretty much 4 days a week.
Next time we do this on a Friday evening, we ought to have a drink while we're doing it.
I got to come to Moscow. Well, now that I'm not working in the same way that I was, I've been looking at that now. I've been looking at what it's going to cost me, what I need to go, how, and I want to go. I'm within the next year, in the summer, the midsummer, because I want to go to Moscow in the midsummer because I want to be able to walk around and see all the stuff outside. It's a little chilly in the wintertime. I might have to bundle up. So.
I'm not happy unless I can see my breath, Garland.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, thanks a lot. All right, everybody, follow Mark Sleboda. And then don't forget, look, right now we got Mark, we had over 2,000 people watching today. So that means everybody needs to do this. We still got 1,918.
You're awesome out there.
What we need to do, everybody, click the like and subscribe. And here's the thing. Share this on all your social media platforms. If 1,900 people share this, then lots of people will see it. And a lot of people need to see this kind of stuff and need to hear from Mark. They need to hear from a voice of reason and intellect in Moscow. Thanks a lot, Mark. Thanks a lot, everybody. Share this on all your social media platforms. You see everything scrolling across the bottom. If you can afford to donate to the channel, that's great. If not, just share everything and follow me on Rockfin and follow me on what's the hell the other one, Rumble, just in case they ever toss me off of YouTube, which we hope won't happen. You'll be able to find me. Thanks a lot, everybody. We're out.
That's what on you.